Hello, everyone. Nathaniel Gavronsky here, and I am at the Battle of Concord. I am at the Concord Bridge, the North Bridge of Concord. I am standing on the American side of the bridge. This is from this perspective, from behind me, from right behind me. That area is where the Minutemen were watching as smoke billowed up from Concord. Now, the British who had arrived here, they broke up their forces from Lexington to go check out several of the areas where they had suspected there to be stores of gunpowder and smoothbore long guns. Because again, the whole purpose of this journey out here was to prevent the colonists from having the means of fighting an armed rebellion. That's the whole point of the British coming out here, the British regulars. They come out here, and when Lexington kind of went awry, that raised alarms literally all over the countryside. So that original 700 force of men is actually now getting to a point where they're outnumbered, especially since the regulars are broken up. They're going to several different areas trying to find all these different munition stores. So the British regulars that are stationed here, they're actually stationed on the opposite end of the bridge, and we'll go down there in a minute. But this is where the Americans show up. This is where they come in. So a couple things here. You have Isaac Davis. Now, Isaac Davis is important because he was one of the most well-equipped troops. His men were some of the best equipped. They all had fixed bayonets, were able to lead charges. He was probably the most excited person to be at this battle. You also had the commanding officer of the operation, Buttrick, who would be up there with the men, and they're encouraging them, we got to go do it. We're going to have to do something about this. And they're sitting there, are you going to actually just watch them burn down your town? Getting the men fired up. They start coming down here. Now, here's where history happens. So the soldiers, the Minutemen, are marching this direction. All right, across the bridge is a regular detachment. And they shoot off a warning volley, like, "Hey, Lexington was a bad thing. Let's don't duplicate it. Let's don't have a redo of Lexington. Don't come up here." And the Continentals aren't stopping. They keep walking up. Well, second volley, full volley into the Continental Regiment, and two fall. One of the first is Isaac Davis. Isaac Davis becomes the first American officer to be killed in battle, and the very first American KIA as far as an organized Minutemen. Don't forget, the boys down in Lexington weren't actually a Minutemen organization. Parker's guys were mostly his relatives, and they had been mostly kind of haphazardly put together, and they weren't really designed to put up a fight, and were told not to by Parker himself. It just happened to be that shot was fired, and people just reacted the way they did. But this was a planned confrontation. Why I know that is because this is the first time where Buttrick was the commanding officer, who actually ordered his men to fire upon the British. Once Davis fell, he said, "Soldiers, fire, soldiers, for God's sakes, fire." And that was the first time that an American had ordered an American soldier to fire upon the regular British Army. Now, this monument behind me, this monument here is the Minutemen Monument. It was dedicated here in 1875 for the centennial, and was dedicated by President Ulysses S. Grant along with several members of the administration. The statue was actually cast from several different Civil War cannons they used to make it, and it's been dedicated by Ulysses S. Grant, and also Gerald Ford came here and dedicated with a wreath as well for the 1875 statue. Now, this statue was on the British side. The American side. This is where the Americans were. This is the American perspective. If you look behind me, this is where the Americans were. That's what the Americans were seeing. And we're going to cross the bridge now. This is where the Americans are coming to take us over. So we're walking. We're going to go over the bridge. Now, so this bridge, so we're over the Concord River, and this bridge has been taken down, rebuilt multiple times. This isn't a historical structure. The most recent kind of rebuild of this happened in the last 20 years. So it's a good bridge. They do reenactments on it, but this is the bridge. This is the famous North Bridge. Even though when these statues were actually planted, when they were raised, the one behind me, the 1875, there was no bridge here. And when we get to this one down here, we're going to see another bridge, another statue. Now, they actually built this bridge at the same time they were building the other statue, but it wasn't quite done yet when they were doing it. So now this is the British regular perspective. This is the perspective the British regulars are getting from Concord. This is where that detachment of defenders was at when they heard the marching of the colonial Minutemen. This is what they were seeing. This is where they were at. Now, there are around 10 British casualties here. Two are killed on the spot. One actually dies, a little further away. When they try to save him, but 2 are killed immediately at this little skirmish. And this is where they are buried. Right behind me are the graves of 2 British men. And it says, "Grave of British soldiers. They came 3,000 miles and died to keep the past upon its throne. Unheard beyond the ocean tide, their English mother made her moan." April 19th, 1775. So that's still, and then when Gerald Ford was here, the British ambassador came and laid a wreath. And there's a representative of the British government that does come over here from time to time to lay wreaths here. Now, this is the original monument here. This was actually not put up until 1836, so quite a while after the battle. Most war monuments aren't put up until sometimes decades, or in one case, a century later. The Yorktown monument, for example, wasn't completed for over a century after the battle was over. But this one here, it says, "Here on the 19th of April, 1775, was made the first forceful resistance to British aggression on the opposite bank. Stood the American militia. Here stood the invading army. And on this spot, the first of the enemy fell in the war of that revolution, which gave independence to these United States in gratitude to God and in the love of freedom." This monument was erected in 1836. This is where Concord took place. This is after the Battle of Lexington. They come down here. The British are trying to defend. The Americans come and they remove the British. It's actually from this spot that the British make their hasty retreat, because they know they're quickly becoming outnumbered. The numbers of colonial Minutemen showing up throughout the morning has grown steadily, and the British, who had been marching all through the night and hadn't found much, were exhausted, tired, and were now coming under increasing fire. They would the whole battle. The British regulars would leave this area about noon to head back towards Boston, and over that trek from Concord to Boston, the British regulars would be constantly harassed and attacked all the way back to Boston. The number of British casualties were somewhere around 271 casualties. The Americans were I think 93. There was throughout the rest of the day. So the Americans came out better at the end of it. They lost fewer men, and had fewer men to begin with, but lost fewer men. And the British were able to gain numbers, but kept losing soldiers throughout the constant retreat. And so here we go, a view from the British side of the bridge. You've seen the monument to the 2 British soldiers that are here. And, in Lexington, there are American patriots buried. Here at Concord, the enemy soldiers are buried. So that is kind of a connection that both countries have, is that they have some of their beloved sons buried here in these grounds. And that's basically Concord. Like I said, when they came here, they didn't find much. Then what they burnt, the little they did find that they burnt, end up backfiring on them because it drove out more and more people that might not have had a resistance, might not have had a problem, but because they thought the town was under, fire and in danger, they decided to come out and actually try to put a stop to it. But this is where the first organized, planned resistance takes place. Lexington is kind of, initially almost like an afterthought, because this is where the big battle took place on the first day. But again, if it wasn't for Lexington and having that create alarm among the countryside, this battle might have ended up differently as well. So every little step that they took from last night, the 18th, where Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Dr. Prescott traveled through the Massachusetts countryside to warn all the Minutemen that the regular army was coming. Even though that two of the men were unable to finish their ride, Prescott's message got through. That kind of culminates into what happened here. People were warned, they got here, and from here, after today, there is no going back. The battles that take place on the retreat back to Boston secure the fact that the British are no longer going to be playing around. Washington would be dispatched to take command of the American forces up here in Boston. He would arrive later in the year. This took place while the Continental Congress was actually meeting in Philadelphia. And the 20th, the day after, the 20th of April, 1775, in Williamsburg, Virginia, a message had already gotten down there that this had happened. And James Monroe became politicized and into the revolution from this. He was part of the student body group that marched from William and Mary to the governor's mansion in Williamsburg and started demanding answers and promises of the tyranny would not be there in Virginia as it had been up here in Massachusetts. And so there's kind of a building up of individuals who would play this game out, all from the sexton of the Old North Church putting out those two lanterns, to the midnight riders, to the men who decided that within the minute's call to come and serve their country. And from that act of service, and for those men who died here, that act of service gave us these United States and all the things that we, the people, in order for the more perfect union, have accomplished in those 250 years. This is Nathaniel Gavronsky from the Battle of Concord at Concord's North Bridge, wishing everyone a wonderful and great Patriot Day. I hope to see you around for more of my videos, and I will see you all very, very soon. Bye.